Well, howdy, and welcome to Conversations with Coyotes. My name is Bravado, I am a coyote, and this is The Conversation. I've been thinking about being cool again, or rather, what it means to be cool. This was partly spurred by a colleague telling me about a trip he recently took overseas, and my initial response was, wow, that's really cool, because it was. And then, because I'm also horribly broken, my immediate next thought was that I will never do anything that cool because I am boring. And that's not great, but it's also not true. I reminded myself of that pretty quickly by remembering that just a few days prior, I was ice skating in an animal suit, a fact which may be a lot of things, but is objectively not boring. In fact, furry in general is pretty good at not being boring. Weird things rarely are. So now we're back to talking about being weird. And I guess this is as good a time as any with the recent magazine article about whether furry will ever be mainstream, but also because the ephemeral nature of social media is such that things aren't as simple as saying your opinion one time and having it be remembered forever. On the bright side, it kinda works in my favor because it means I can just keep making this same video again and again and nobody will ever be the wiser. But before we can continue, we need to step back for a moment. When I was just a youngin', being seen as cool by the other kids meant so much to me. I was caught up in the idea of what cool 80s kids were about, whether they were at my school or on TV, and that was doing cool things, wearing cool clothes, and never ever being weird or embarrassed or any of that. At least that's how my young brain interpreted it. And when you're exposed to that sort of thing at that sort of age, it has a tendency to warp your way of thinking. I was especially convinced that cool kids never looked silly, and so I very purposefully avoided doing things that might come across that way, sometimes at the expense of my own enjoyment. Now, if you're following along at home and thinking, this is where kinks come from, yes. But I digress. Even as an adult, I was really cautious about sharing any of my weird interests with people so as not to risk suddenly being thought of as uncool. And boy, did it wear on me. See, having an interest in any particular topic is sort of like you're holding the weight. And when you don't have anyone to share that interest with, you're effectively carrying all of it alone, and it gets exhausting. But when you find people with whom you can be open about your interest and really indulge, suddenly that weight is distributed and that burden disappears. But the thing is, you are not going to make those connections unless you're also at least somewhat willing to put yourself out there. I can't help but think about this in the context of the furry fandom as a whole, or at least what it started out as, because at some point, before it had a name and any sort of tangibility, some folks were talking and discovered a mutual affinity for cartoon animals. That simple interaction sounds so small and inconsequential, but look what it's grown into. My point is, the only reason we know a lot of this stuff even exists in the first place and isn't just some crazy thing in our heads is because somebody before us was willing to put their weirdness out there for others to see. And so, that's what we should try to do too, even if it's just a little bit at a time or with a few close friends. I said earlier that this video was about being cool, but the coolest people I know are the ones who are unafraid to be their true selves, no matter how weird that may be. The best thing I can do, then, is to try to lead by example, to continue to be a little more open about things that would have given me pause 10 or 5 or even 1 year ago. So here's to a weird new decade to come. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.